The Monday morning quarterback is back. Hope you had a great weekend and hope you're enjoying a beautiful day. It is obligatory weather report. I know how some of you love that. Sunny and 79 degrees today in the township. So hopefully wherever you are, you're enjoying much the same weather. We finished up Exodus, or at least the first 18 chapters. Remember, it's divided basically into two sections, and we did a cursory view, although we kind of went in depth, didn't we, a little bit with chapter 1, or excuse me, section 1. And yesterday we finished up with chapter 18. So if you have not yet worshiped, I want to encourage you to go back and worship with us online and then rejoin this video. So you can go ahead and stop it now and go back and either our Facebook page, YouTube channel, or our church website, and you'll find that service there. If you already have worshiped, let's dig into chapter 18. So yesterday, I just wanted to kind of tee it up by saying that we have the reunion of a family in chapter 18. Moses, remember, he left Midian, left his wife Zipporah and their sons back in Midian with her father-in-law Jethro. And Moses and Aaron went down to Egypt. And of course, we have the great story of the Exodus. And now we joined the story, or we joined it yesterday, where Moses' father-in-law is bringing Moses' wife and children back to him. And so they're all getting back together again. And we did note yesterday, and I didn't teach on it back in May, that Moses and Zipporah, his wife, really, they had a little bit of a parting of the ways. And if you want to go back and read the end of chapter 4, you'll see why that was. But in the comments I made yesterday, I just reminded our congregation that their quarrel was over circumcision. And at one point, we have Zipporah circumcising Gershom, their oldest child, and throwing the foreskin at Moses' feet and saying, "You are a bloody husband." Kind of not a great scene there. And that's how Moses left home. So you have to wonder if that was playing on his mind the whole time he was down in Egypt. But they're all back together again. So we began with verse 1, and I just wanted to illustrate yesterday that Jethro was a priest of Midian. And I think that's important to note, because what we see here, and I didn't really go into it yesterday, is that Moses was taking advice from someone outside of God's covenant at that moment, or at that point. He was not an Israelite. He was a priest of Midian, which means he probably was viewed as an elder with some kind of wisdom and probably made sacrifices to the small g gods and small g goddesses, but no one that Moses would view as an authority of matters related to God or Yahweh. But we have him appearing on the scene. What I'd like to do is encourage you now to go ahead and stop the video and read chapter 18, verses 9 and 12. You can read 9 through, you can read the whole thing if you want, but read 9 and 12, and then let's get back together again. So go ahead and stop the video now. Start it back up. As you are looking at the scripture, let me share with you some of the notes that I made. First of all, I wanted to emphasize yesterday that Jethro understood that it was God who delivered the people, not Moses. And so even though Jethro was this priest of Midian, he has some degree of faith, or he's seeing the hand of God at work. He's probably thinking, the gods and goddesses that I'm making sacrifices to, they couldn't have done that. They could not have done what Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, did. I mean, we have to believe that that's probably what he's going through, what's going through his mind. And then I think it's so interesting, and I want to dive into this with you right now, that Jethro's response to what the Lord had done for Israel, you see that in verse 9, was to worship. And so we highlighted yesterday the word offering, sacrifices, eat, and presence. So he made an offering, an act of worship. He made sacrifices to God, which was acknowledging God's deeds. We're going to show you our thanks. We're going to make a sacrifice to you. Then they had an intentional meal. So think communion. They sat around in the presence of God. So the response to God's goodness and God's power and deliverance was to worship him. And the question I posed yesterday was, how do you and I respond when we acknowledge the goodness and greatness of God? What do? When you think about the cross and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, How do you and I respond to that? What do you think? And then we drilled down, we kind of peeled another layer and drilled down a little bit deeper. And I asked the question, and I want to ponder this with you, and maybe you want to make some journal notes. We are told by Jesus to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's how we love God. We are also told to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Later he says also love your enemies. How do you in your life show your love for God? What do you do? I asked that question at Thursday night at Thursday church, and I got a variety of answers. I show God I love him by serving others. That's vital. That's the second commandment. But that's not the same as the first, is it? And maybe that's something to think about. No, how do you show God that you love him? In my journal, I have made notes, and typically the way I show God I love him is to worship him. And that's hard for me because worship on Sunday morning for me is a time of I'm leading. So I try to worship as well as lead at the same time. And you can imagine if you were doing the same thing. It's easy to get caught up in the mechanics of the service. And you know me, I look at my watch all the time and how's everybody doing, and looking at the room, making sure everyone is kind of still with me. And so anyhow, but how do you show God that you love him? I believe that worship is one of the primary ways we do that. We carve out, we set aside time to worship him. That's how we say, God, I love you. And of course, we also say, God, I love you by serving others, which is, like I said, is the second commandment. We then move on. Okay, so if you want to take some time and make some notes, I think that's good. I think that's really important to ponder, though. How do I show God that I love him? All right, verses 13 and 14, we now see that Moses' father-in-law is making some observations. And so if you'll take time and read 13 and 14, go ahead and stop the video. We'll get right back to it, and let's make some theological reflections. So go ahead and stop the video. Start it back up. All right, what do you see there? I'll tell you what some of the things that I see. First of all, the next day, so Moses has to get back to work. I noticed the difference between Moses and the people. He sits, they stand. He's alone. They're together as a group. And Jethro is seeing all of this and says, that's out of balance. That's not right. God has not designed his community to operate in this way. And so Moses' father-in-law asks a question, which, by the way, little bonus thought, what a great way to engage someone, to ask a question rather than to make a judgment or an accusation or a statement or an observation. Start with a question. And I think that opens up the conversation. So he says, why are you doing this what is this you are doing for all the people? In other words, tell me what you're doing here. Why do you sit alone as judge while they're all standing around? Well, Moses then answers in verses 15 and 16. And I'm just going to go ahead and read it. You can read along with me. Moses answered, because the people come to me to seek God's will. In other words, the reason that I am sitting alone in judgment is because they're coming to me. Moses is the sole authority. And we remembered yesterday, and I think it's important just to kind of maintain understanding of the context. The reason the people are standing around waiting for Moses to tell them what to do is that they've been slaves. And so they weren't used to being free. They didn't have an experience of making decisions. They didn't have that kind of flexibility. And as someone pointed out to me, rightly so, in an email, with freedom also comes responsibility. And they were not used to that kind of responsibility, having to shoulder care for their family, for example. It was kind of always provided for them. So now they're just waiting around for Moses to tell them what to do. And so Moses then in this says, hey, when they have a dispute, it's brought to me and I decide. And I inform the people of God's decrees and instructions. So we have two different views of what's going on here. Jethro says, this doesn't seem to be really a good situation. Moses is like, no, this is the way it is. And this is the way it's going to stay. Well, his father-in-law in verses 17 and 18, let's just keep reading together. He replies, what you're doing is not good. And then he gives two warnings about Moses doing all the work. First warning is, Moses, you will wear yourself out. The second warning, we all have physical limitations. And I kind of wandered into thinking about priorities yesterday. Didn't quite go all the way down that road, but we do need to make priorities. I know that I do in my life. Moses, you're going to wear yourself out. And number two, and these people will be worn out as well. Isn't that interesting that Moses would not only be fatigued himself, but because of the system that he has instituted, everybody else is going to be tired. And you're standing around waiting all day long for Moses to give them some kind of a judgment. And we then moved into thinking about our church, as well as just life in general and organizations in general. But in our church, we have shared leadership. I have my very specific role here. Can't do everything. Don't try to do everything. Even if I tried, I wouldn't do it well, for sure. And that's what God is establishing here. And I wanted to make sure that we understood yesterday that he is establishing a relational structure. You see that? He's gonna set up a system where people can have relationships with one another, and not everything all revolves around Moses, which is the way Moses had it at that point. And so in verses 19 and 20, let's just read it together. Listen to me, Jethro says, and I'll give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God. And I kind of moved that into intercession. You're going to pray for the people. You're going to make intercession for the people. We do that for the people in our lives. God has given us all people to love and to care for, and that's what we do. We make intercession for them. Also, you're going to teach them his decrees and instructions and show them how they are to live and behave. Boy, if you're a parent, isn't that just marvelous counsel? Teach your children God's word and model for your children how to live out that word. Precisely what God is instructing Moses through, I believe, the voice of Jethro here. And so then he gives him this wonderful structure that the people are going to enjoy. Verses 21 and 22. We'll just read on. But select capable men, in this case men, select capable men from all the people. What makes a person capable of being a leader? Let's just read together. Who fear God. I circled that number one. They revere God. To fear God in this sense is not to be quaking in our boots, although I think that there's probably an element of health when we do that, because God is the God of the universe and we are just mere mortals. But it's to revere or to be awestruck by God. So you're capable if you fear God. You're humble. It's not about me, it's about God. You're trustworthy. Notice that. People who are trustworthy. You're going to be dealing with people's lives here. You've got to be trusted. That is a sacred relationship you've got. And hate dishonest gain. So you got to find people who are selfless and not looking out for themselves. And appoint them as officials. And then he gives a structure. You got some people who are going to be over thousands, which is a lot. Hundreds, which I can identify with. 50s and 10s. And have them serve as judges for the people at all times. And I circle at all times because they have to be available. So what is the criteria here for Christian leadership, or for you as a leader even in your own home? Be humble, fear God. Be trustworthy. It's a sacred trust that you are handling in this person's life. Be selfless, not selfish, dishonest gain. And be available. I say it over and over again. The greatest ability is availability, being willing. And so this is the structure that he sets up. And I see the body of Christ written all over that, don't you? When you think about the early church, that's exactly how it was set up. Well, so this is it. This is the structure that he gives to Moses. And then here's the benefit. Moses, verses 23 through 27. He says, Moses, if you do this, and God so commands, so Jethro said, hopefully God's in this. You'll be able to stand the strain. So Moses, you're going to be okay. And trust me, as a leader, oh my goodness, knowing that I've got a team of people around me handling what I can't handle, that allows me to sleep at night. You'll stand the strain, and everybody else is going to go home satisfied. And the word satisfied here, I didn't go into it yesterday, essentially means they'll have their needs met, they'll be free from doubt, and their minds will be at ease. So they're going to be satisfied because you set up this new system. And we noted what comes next. Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. So we got a lot of humility in Moses as well. He didn't say to Jethro, look, I've been running this show and you've been out in the middle of Midian. Didn't do that. Listened to him and did everything he said. And then I just kind of threw in verse 27. Then Moses said to his father-in-law, you can go home now. Then Moses sent his father-in-law on his way. And that's how the story ends. For our Monday morning quarterbacking, here are the takeaways I want you to think about. At least the ones I'm thinking about. First of all, going all the way back to that question, how do I show God I love him? What is my response to all that God has done for me in Jesus Christ? And of course, the easy answer for me is worship, but I got to really drill down, even when I think about worship. How in my worship am I saying, God, I love you and I'm so grateful? And then the other for me is the concept of a relational structure. God has created us for community, and I have to pay attention to that in my own life because I can get kind of isolated. This job, this vocation that I have can be isolating, believe it or not. And I know that I need people and need to be a part of that relational structure. And so what about you? Who's your community? Who are your people? Because I think that's how God designed your heart and my heart to exist. I think I'm done. I think we have finished the first 18 chapters of Exodus. Next week is the 3rd of July, and I am going to be teaching on the story of the Good Samaritan out of Luke chapter 10, but thinking in terms of citizenship, since it's the 4th of July. All right, that's where we'll go next week. Hope you have a great week, and I'll look forward to either seeing you in person or just knowing you're with us online. Bye for now.